Hello, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in. In this video, I'm going to be really deep diving into Dehancer Pro. I'm a videographer and editor, not a professional colorist, but I've been using Dehancer Pro for probably well over a year now. And so I've been able to thoroughly test using the plugin through its iterations, through professional work, through personal work. And I thought in this video, I would kind of slow down, and rather than cutting together a quick video on just the hows of putting together a quote unquote cinematic image with film emulation, I would really kind of scale back the video in terms of just like letting you see not only how I do things in Dehancer Pro, but also why. And that's really important because once you know the why, you can then translate it to your own work. The clip I'll be color grading today is going to be downloadable. So if you want to head to the description and download that and plug it into DaVinci Resolve, you'll be able to grade along with me and see the changes I'm making and see why I'm doing that. And you'll also learn just kind of the whys of multiple things. And so you'll learn that processes used for one clip you may not use for other clips. Another helpful tip, if you have like a old family photos, childhood pictures, etc., that were shot on film, like I have here is a photo album of when I was a kid and went to camp. So these were all shot on film, printed on Kodak paper. This can be a helpful thing to have, just like sitting on my desk. As I'm getting the film look, I'm able to look at an actual film print and kind of see and gauge like how close I'm getting to a film emulation. If you have any film photographs laying around, it's really helpful to grab those. If you don't have any printed film laying around, go online, find a movie or photo that was shot on film, and just have that there, just as a reference as we're in color grading together. With all that being said, we're going to start from the bottom. Like I don't even have my project set up yet in DaVinci, and so we'll just go like step by step together. So hopefully if you're struggling at all with Dehancer or you've used it for a long time and you feel like you just can't get consistent results, this video is here to help you, and hopefully I answer as many questions as possible. If I leave anything out, please be sure to leave a comment down below. I'm interested in helping people out above all, above video retention, above everything. So I'm just kind of throwing all that out the window, and let's go ahead and dive in and start working with Dehancer Pro. Here's our project. So we have one clip in our media pool, and this will be the clip that is in the description. Be sure to download that so we can color grade along together. This is a clip shot in S-Log 3.cine, and this was shot at work. I'm a videographer for a plumbing company. This tutorial will also be really helpful to those who don't set up a ton of lights or gear or at all. I'm really excited to be able to show you ways to color grade footage that's just kind of shot run and gun style. This shot has a lot of elements to it, pretty big contrast. So we'll be able to kind of go through that, how we'll work through contrast together on this image. Let's go down to this cogwheel. Click on here, and it's probably good to note I'm on DaVinci Resolve Studio 19 public beta. I believe I'm on public beta number 5 at the time of recording this video. Color science, we're going to keep this in DaVinci YRGB. We're not going to, for this instance, use a color managed workflow. You can use a color managed workflow with Dehancer. There are instructions in the manual how to do so. For this one, we will be using Dehancer Pro and a Rec 709 setup. So for that, we'll keep the color science at DaVinci YRGB, timeline color science, Rec 709, and we're going to change this to Rec 709A. And the reason why we're using Dehancer Pro in this Rec 709 timeline color space is because for me personally, I feel like I get the best results using a Rec 709 workflow with using the camera profile input source in Dehancer Pro. So that's personally for me why I use it. Also, it helps me get an appropriate amount of contrast to really pop. It's really a matter of preference. So when you're starting out with when you're doing it this way, we're going to get a little bit more of a contrasty look out the gate, a little bit more saturation out the gate. And then I think the grain just looks better using the plugin with these timeline color settings. And then we're going to change this to same as timeline. If you're on a PC, you don't have to worry about changing this to Rec 709. Rec 709A is actually for Mac, and it basically puts the footage in a way to where whenever you export it, it looks the same way as when you're editing it in DaVinci. We're going to hit save. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to drop the clip onto our timeline. Let's go a few spaces down and get rid of that motion blur. Okay, let's hit color, and we're going to add our Dehancer Pro plugin. The Dehancer Pro plugin software that I'm on currently is Dehancer Pro 7.2.0. At the recording of this video, we're simply just going to drag and place it on our node. For the purpose of this video and demonstrating, we're literally going to just use one node. So now that the Dehancer Pro is on this node, we can just label it if we want to, and we can disable nodes since we won't need to change anything, and then we'll click on clips and just make the image pretty big so that I can see it and you can see it and we're all happy. So the first thing we'll do is go to our input settings. We're going to choose camera, and then we're just going to select our vendor. So this one's Sony. This is shot with an A7S III, and then S-Log3 S-Gamut3.cine. For right now, what we're going to do is turn off film, and this is basically going to show us what the camera profile that Dehancer made is doing to our footage. This is kind of like Dehancer's version of a CST or Dehancer's version of a transformation LUT. This is what this is doing. And I mentioned earlier how you can use Dehancer Pro in a DaVinci wide gamut color space. If you don't know which one you prefer, what I would recommend you doing is setting up a timeline where you're using the input choose camera source and choose your camera, and then set up a project in DaVinci wide gamut with color space transforms and see which one you like better. So let's actually do that here. We're going to open the nodes back up and let's see if we wanted to do that. So let's go to our color science. Let's actually go into DaVinci wide gamut just so I can show you what I'm talking about. And then our output color space is going to be Rec 709A. Right here, this will be 2 DaVinci wide gamut. This will be 2 Rec 709. So what I'll do here is let's get our color space transforms and choose our camera, which our camera is the Sony S-Log3.cine, S-Log3. We're going to DaVinci wide gamut. And then here, we need to get back to Rec 709. So let's put our color space transform on there. We're going from DaVinci wide gamut to Rec 709 and then Rec 709A. So it's a pretty similar conversion. So what you would do then is you would compare the results you get from this setup, and then you basically compare them with the results you get with our first setup. And then you would just kind of basically choose which one you like better, and that answers your question of kind of which method that you would want to do. I will note on here the grain is enabled, so that's going to change it a little bit. So before we go any further, let's disable the grain. I like the Dehancer Pro camera profile, so for this video we're continue using that. I just wanted to there show you if you were unsure of whether or not you wanted which direction you wanted to go with your workflow, that kind of answers your question there. So let's get rid of those. We are back in our first workflow. What Dehancer recommends to do is actually go down to vignette first. And the reason why you adjust your vignette first is because it's going to affect your overall exposure and contrast. And typically printed film vignetting, that's just kind of a byproduct of shooting on film. So what we'll do here is we'll enable it, and I'll kind of show you how I go about doing it. So let's turn our exposure all the way down just so we can see the shape of the vignette. And then from there, I'll adjust kind of the size. Actually, no, let's go down to feather. And that's going to show you the hardest of the vignette. I kind of like a harder vignette, so we'll do that. And then we can adjust the size. I like to do it just to the corners. And then I go to my exposure and I kind of fine tune it. My process there is exposure all the way down, then use your feather to see kind of the edges of the vignette, and then you can adjust the size. I don't touch the aspect ratio. I just leave that as it is, and then I don't touch the center. I like having the vignette like center on the image. So this is before, this is after. Let me enlarge that. So the next thing we want to do is now let's add on our film profile. What helps me determine what profile to use is, first of all, I kind of have my mental parameter set on about 4 film profiles because these are the 4 main ones you see in motion picture film. They're Kodak Vision 3 200T, Kodak Vision 3 250D, Kodak Vision 3 500T, Kodak Vision 350D. The D on these stands for daylight balanced, and the T stands for tungsten. And how you could think about these to make it easy is just these will affect kind of overall contrast levels and exposure. So that will help us determine kind of which profile to use. So let me choose a profile that is probably not the best suited for this image, and I'll kind of let you guess why. Let's choose Kodak Vision 3 250D. And here's how you can kind of immediately tell that there's maybe a better option for film profile. As you see here in our waveform, everything just went through the bottom. And on here, we have blacks that they just get absolutely crushed and go underneath 0. Vision 3250D has higher contrast than Vision 350D, so let's choose that. So immediately, this is what I look for when applying film profile on an image, is if I apply it and things don't just get way blown out of proportion. That still leaves 2 profiles left, and again, there's like 70 profiles, but just for simplicity, I'd use these 4 because these are the most popular motion picture films as of today. 200T, that works contrast level, but it's balanced for tungsten, but you can also still work with it. 500T also works. So if you find that you don't like the look of 50D, those are some other options there. Let's do 50D, and you'll notice here it actually loses contrast. So what we'll do is we'll use our expand, and we want to sort of fit this film profile on top of here. To show you that, let's click that off. And you'll see here how we just sort of lose contrast when we apply the film. So basically all we're doing is we're just kind of fitting this image back into where it was. So let's kind of give back that contrast and back up there. The next thing we're going to do, we're going to go down to our print. We want to find a Kodak print profile to match our Kodak film. Typically, this is how it works. If you shoot Kodak, you print Kodak. If you shoot Fujifilm, I imagine you print Fujifilm. For creative choices, you can mix that up if you wanted to print on Kodak and Duraglossy paper. But for me, I stick to matching it up, Kodak with Kodak. So we're going to choose Kodak 2380 for your print film. And this is going to introduce a ton of contrast. If you're new to film emulation, it may take a bit getting used to it, but film has a ton of contrast. So this may be something that's a little bit kind of foreign to get used to. A practice you can do is you hit print and you just kind of get used to the image. We still have a lot of work to do. From here, we can see our blacks are crushing on the red side. It's really, just underneath 0. And by crush, I'm looking at this waveform. So basically, we start getting detail loss underneath 0, and our reds are getting there. So our first line of defense at this point is to turn on the analog range limiter. And that gets us a little bit more, headroom for contrast. What we're going to do now is we're going to leave this, and we're going to go up to Film Developer. What Film Developer does, you can basically construct your image contrast-wise in a way where if you want it to work better with the film profile or the print profile, you can. So let me just kind of demonstrate what I've started liking doing with the Film Developer is use it to fine-tune the contrast. Like I said before, the film emulation contrast is pretty heavy. So I'll actually boost it here, the contrast, and then you can choose where you want your kind of midtones to lie. So let me do that again. So contrast, it's just, that's pushing the brightest parts of the image and the darkest part of the images. It's pushing them up and down. And then the gamma correction is just reallocating that. You can see here where mainly this midsection of our graph is moving. It's just kind of reallocating where we want that part of the image to lie. So contrast boost, that's the shadows and the highlights, that's pushing those on either side. And then our gamma correction can be used to kind of fine tune that. I like it about here. We're kind of wild with contrast, but that's okay. The next tool we're going to use is the film compression. Also on this film developer, if you find that your image doesn't have a ton of contrast, you can add in some contrast here. I will advise that film by nature is kind of lower contrast, so I would just be careful on that. On the color boost, if you push it too far, you can start breaking the image. If you look down here in the waveform, the blues, they're kind of going underneath 0. I'm crushing those, and you can see it in here. It just looks gnarly when you have the color boost up too high. So as I'm adjusting the color boost, I'm keeping an eye on the graph to make for sure I'm not just kind of blowing out, just crushing everything. I will, while we're at it, we can go to the black point and we can actually raise this a little bit like so that, kind of pull our image off the ground. A common characteristic of film is that it doesn't actually go true black. So if you look on here, like this is a pretty dark area, but it's not actually going straight up black. The same thing with the shirt. I can show you that if we go to output blanking at like 133 here's like true black. And you can see on there, we're not actually, that black isn't matching this right there. So that's what I mean by that. Let's get rid of this output blanking. Let's go to film compression. So film by nature has a lot more dynamic range than digital photography and digital videography, and it handles highlights way better. So what the film compression does is it mimics that. And so this is mainly going to be working with highlights. So let's enable it. And you can see immediately what it's doing in the top here, the highlights. It's kind of rolling off in a kind of a pleasing way. And so what I like to do with the film compression is we're going to leave the impact where it's at. This white point affects the steepness of the highlights. And then as you go to the right, it kind of rolls off. So you can imagine, so basically this is increasing contrast, and this will be kind of less contrast in the highlights. Tonal range, that basically starts putting your highlights into the midtones. So as I go higher up, your highlights get higher. As I go right, it starts pushing all the highlights toward the midtone area. And you can really see it in the faces here. So this is 30. We see kind of highlighty areas in here where the face is kind of pretty contrasty. And let's go to tonal range and pull it down. Go back to the faces. It definitely rolls off a lot of the contrast. And you can see here where it kind of makes the skin tone almost kind of like a pastel. What we're going to do here with film compression is what I like to do. Raising the white point for contrast on the top end, but then we're going to take our tonal range and push it down. And I'm doing another kind of technique here where to get the right amount, I'm actually going maybe too far for some people, but then I'm just going to bring it back. You can do the same thing with white point. You kind of go too far, then back. So typically this is how I would have it on the film compression, where white point goes left and the tonal range goes right. And the reason why I do it like this is because if you take the white point and you start to go too smooth and not steep, you're losing contrast in the top end. For me, in order for things to really pop on YouTube, white point up here. And then what you can do is you set your ratio here, and then you use the impact to just fine tune that. So once you kind of have this set, like leave it if you want, and then to the right on the impact is more of that effect, and to the left is less of that effect. It's generally just sets around 60, and then so just for the flow sake and workflow, it makes it easier to set your ratios there and then choose your impact. Color density, I just leave it. From what I've read on analog media with motion picture film is that the highlights typically don't have a ton of saturation. Like you lose saturation as you go higher into your highlights, which makes sense that when you pull the tonal range down into the midtones, you actually start getting more color. So let's look at that. If I go my tonal range and move it up, it's not as much contrast as when I start putting everything into the midtones. So if you find that you're not getting a ton of color, besides using color boost, using your tonal range, getting more color into your midtones, and then using your white point to still kind of maintain a really nice contrast level. And then after you do that, if you need to, you can adjust your black and white points. And then we're kind of at the point now where we're just doing our creative adjustments. Everything up until now has kind of been more so like technical, but this is where you can start having a little bit more fun. Here we're going to go down to print, and I like using the exposure and tonal contrast in tandem. What Dehancer recommends is lowering exposure while increasing contrast. And let's just start moving exposure, and you can see kind of what it's doing. When you lower exposure in the print section, it starts to give the image a richness. Let's do that again. As you go from here, it really starts to just make everything look dense. And then you can go in your contrast and boost that up. Now we're really just really squeezing this image. So what you can do here is say move your contrast slider too far and back again, back again. The reason why I do that is because sometimes it feels like you're going too far, but really you can go farther. So I'll just kind of go way extreme and then back again. And you'll find that you can actually push images a lot farther than you realized. So we'll do that. And then we can go back from here if you wanted to, go back into your film developer tool, and then you could even tweak this a little bit more if you wanted to. Go into our film compression, see if there's anything you'd like to change. At this point, it's just sort of the balancing act. Let's see what we have here. I really like it. It's a really gnarly, contrasty image. So to kind of give colors separation, we're going to go down to our color head, and I'll kind of show you a couple different things you can do with the color head. If you want to make it easier on yourself, hit enabled, leave preserve exposure as it is. And then if you're wanting more of a teal and orange look, and when you have preserve exposure on, it's doing some other things behind the scene to keep your image relatively where it's at exposure wise. So just doing that one simple slider gives us a really nice orange and teal look to it. What you can do is if you want further manipulation and manual control, actually turn this exposure all the way down. And when you adjust these, you'll see in the waveform, you basically can just pick up the red section, the green section, and the blue section, and just kind of move the whole thing. See what I'm doing there on the waveform? Just this one slider. You basically can just pick the color and move it. To get a teal look in the shadows, typically how it's done is red is lowest in the shadows, blue is next, and then the green is the highest. So what you would do there is go towards yellow, that moves blue down, and then you have an orange and teal look. Then you can go on your highlights. Right now they're pretty much red and green, which is going to give us an orange look. If you're wanting more of a cleaner look, more balanced, you can go here to your highlights and actually even them out a little bit. And to even them even more, you can go up to your target white, maybe do that. Say if you're commissioned for work, or if you're doing personal work, or for anyone really, and you wanted to use film emulation, but you wanted to still have a pretty just kind of clean, neutral image, that's what you can do. And then fine tune your skin tones. That's going to be in this mid-tone slider. That's also affecting this white van. And then shadows. It's just kind of further adjusting that down there. And then if you're working in here and anything kind of goes out of bounds or kind of too high for your tastes, you can still go in here to white point and adjust that. Typically, I revisit the expand tool several times throughout the process. Say if you wanted to go less contrast, you can always go back up to film developer tool. I try to not come back here too often, just because, I want to make for sure that, I'm being delicate with the image and I'm going through, because what some beginners can do is they'll start the plugin and they'll just go from here to there to here to there, and they're changing things, and it's just they're leaving themselves no backtracking way to get back to the color they were just at. So that's where we're at right there. Film compression. Say if I wanted a little bit more contrast, I can go back to the white point, kind of pull it up more if I wanted to. And then we're just left with sort of the grain, halation, and bloom. For film grain, I like setting it at 65mm ISO 50. You'll notice here in the waveform that actually kind of helps get rid of contrast. In a little bit, you'll see here in the waveform, it actually goes down when I apply it. And enlarge it to kind of see how big the grain is. For me, I like grain just enough to where it's actually affecting the image, but you don't really notice it that much. And then halation, turn that on. The halation dehancer by default's pretty strong, so oftentimes I'll just chop it in half by 35. And then I don't have any sort of pro mist or bloom filter on the camera lens, so I'll go down here to bloom, And again, if you want, the bloom can be kind of strong. So I just like cutting it in half. For film damage, film breath, and gate weave, those are things that I won't turn on until I go to like export, just because it really kind of clogs up the playback. And then if you're wanting to still like edit footage, because obviously sometimes you want to color grade, sometimes edit, and you're kind of in the middle of both, you can actually turn off film grain, halation, and bloom. Go to the settings and maybe let's change it to like 1080. That'll get you like real-time playback, so you can see your look you created, but also be able to edit with it, etc. So, because a lot of times you'll color grade something and then want to edit or change around editing. So that tip kind of helps you be able to have playback. So turning off grain, halation, and bloom, and then turning the master settings to that. So that wraps everything in this video up. Hopefully I covered as much as possible, enough to at least answer some questions, if not all your questions. If you have any outstanding ones that I didn't cover in this video, please drop a comment down below. If you liked this video, make sure to like it. And as always, be sure to subscribe, as this channel is mainly right now focused on color grading, but I'm also looking to move into other filmmaking topics like lighting, just general cinematography stuff. Thank you guys for joining, and I'll see you in the next one.